Christianity first took root on lands that are today Romania as far back as Roman times, after the defeat of Dacia by Trajan in the year 106 AD. Brothers Cyril and Methodius also passed this way. In 1700, in response to a proposal by Emperor Leopold Habsburg, 54 high priests of the Orthodox Church in Transylvania signed an act of union with Rome on behalf of 1,500 priests and 200,000 faithful. They accepted the Pope's supremacy and the Catholic doctrine, whilst keeping the Byzantine rite, and thereby became the Greek Catholic Church. "250 years later, they paid a high price for unity with Rome. Following Transylvania's incorporation into Romania in 1918, the Greek Catholic Church became the biggest and most vigorous religious community in that area. Before the Second World War, the Church had 5 dioceses, numbered over 1.5 million faithful, 2,580 places of worship, and published 20 periodicals with a circulation of 250,000 copies. Over 800,000 members of the laity were actively involved in the Catholic Action Movement.
La sfârșitul celui de-al doilea război mondial, în jumătate.
Towards the end of the Second World War, the eastern half of Europe saw communist governments take power. Of course, due to the external pressure exerted by the Red Army, but above all of the Soviet Union. In 1946, after rigged elections, Romania saw its first communist government installed.
The times of communist dictatorship, with Georgiju Dej and later Nicolae Ceausescu, were amongst others characterized by the stifling of religious practices. The main thrust of this policy did not strike at the mainstream Orthodox Church, because although it did not avoid persecution, it had decided to reach a compromise and cooperate with the authorities. Relations with the Vatican were cut. The Roman Catholic Church, composed mainly of a Hungarian minority, was also tolerated. The biggest enemy proved to be the Greek Catholic Church.
According to what I knew, the order came from Moscow to suppress these Byzantine Catholic churches, being considered as an anomaly by the Russian people, and maybe also by the Russian Orthodox Church at that time, and they wanted them to go back to what they called the Mother Church.
Puis après, une grande médiatisation du nationalisme.
The media talked much about nationalism, that the Mother Church, the Orthodox Church, wants to lead to unity, call everyone to unite. We are all one nation, we must have one faith. We do not need 3 different faiths. They finally convened the so-called synod.
In October 1948, 36 ordinary Greek Catholic priests from Transylvania were gathered in the town of Cluj to sign a document on the strength of which the Greek Catholic Church was to return to the Orthodox Church.
Mulțimea credincioșilor greco-catolici se desolidarizează de Biserica Romei. Legământul de revenire la Biserica Ortodoxă este primit de țăranii și intelectualii ardeleni.
Parce que qu'est-ce qu'ils voulaient? Ils voulaient faire.
Why? What did they want? They wanted to give the impression that a synod of the Greek Catholic Church had been convened and had recanted the decision of the synod of 1700. From the point of view of canon law, such a gathering is invalid. First of all, because there was no bishop present. A synod is a reunion of bishops.
Donc, synode, c'est en général la réunion des évêques.
La București a avut loc ceremonia solemnă a revenirii Bisericii Greco-Catolice la Biserica Ortodoxă. Un număr de 432 de delegați din Ardeal și Banat au semnat hotărârea prin care decid să rupă lecturile cu Biserica Romei. Reprezentanții clerului subliniază importanța actului și adresează un apel către toți credincioșii greco-catolici, cerându-le să urmeze pe păstorii lor sufletești.
Donc, ils ont été portés à Bucarest avec des trains spéciaux qui étaient préparés.
They were brought to Bucharest in a special train to kiss the hand of the Patriarch as a sign of communion. They were then taken to Alba Iulia. Alba Iulia is a very important place for the Romanian people. It is there that the great reunion of the provinces of Romania and Transylvania took place. They wanted to give the whole event a symbolism, that a great reunion of the Orthodox Church had taken place. A stone tablet exists there to this day, on which are inscribed the words, "Here came to pass the great reunion of the Orthodox Church." And to this day, some Orthodox celebrate this reunion there.
Towards the end of October 1948, all of Romania's Greek Catholic bishops were arrested. They were taken to the Internal Affairs Ministry in Bucharest, and then a few days later to Dragoslavl, the summer residence of the Orthodox Patriarch. Communist propaganda proclaimed that the bishops had gone into a retreat.
Evident, au fost duși fiecare pe rând la interogatoriu, li s-a luat tot ce s-a...
Of course, they were all interrogated. All the belongings they had brought with them were confiscated, and they were treated like thieves and criminals. During such meetings, they were put under intense pressure to renounce their union with the Holy See and to unite with the Orthodox Church. The villa was surrounded by a barbed wire fence, whilst a military platoon prevented anyone from entering or leaving the building.
Un pluton de armată care îi păzea și nu îi lăsa să comunice, nu îi lăsa să iasă din această clădire.
In the meantime, the government administered its final blow with the publication on December 1st, 1948, of a final decree taking the Greek Catholic Church out from under Romanian law.
Scoțând în afara legii Biserica Greco-Catolică din România.
The decree also claimed that all the faithful had returned to the Orthodox Church, which was not true.
Ceea ce nu era adevărat.
After the bishops and the priests being arrested, the communist regime tried to force the common people to sign different lists of becoming Orthodox. So in every village, party activists and securitate officers went from house to house, and there were different tactics. A tactic was to lie and to tell people these are lists for receiving some different things like sugar, for example, and many people did not know to read and they signed.
Il y avait une personne qui disait,
They came and said, "We have come to see what animals you have. We have chicken, 2 dogs and 3 cats. All right, please sign here." And so he would sign what in fact was a document confirming his passage to the Orthodox Church.
il allait, c'était le passage à l'orthodoxie.
People who did not want to sign a confirmation of their passage to the Orthodox Church were subject to a great witch hunt. Those refusing to submit were insulted. You would be caught, given some table to sign. You were told that you would receive God knows what benefits, and so you would sign. Only later did you find out that you had passed to the Orthodox fold. That is how people were cheated.
Mais il y avait aussi des résistances assez fortes.
But then there were people who resisted. The army had to intervene on one occasion when a community refused to change their faith and would not give up their priest. People picked up their tools and drove out 4 police agents. It was then that the military were called in. The army surrounded the village and issued an ultimatum. Either you give up your priest, or all of you go to prison. The priest preferred to go to prison.
Et alors, le prêtre a préféré aller lui-même en prison.
More than 500 priests were in prison as well, and many monks, nuns, and simple believers. The communist regime confiscated all our churches and goods and gave them to the Orthodox Church. So after 1948, officially the Greek Catholic Church did not exist anymore.
From amongst the few voices of protest at the time, one dramatic text survives. Written in Paris in 1949, Mircea Eliade, a Romanian religious expert of world renown and an Orthodox Christian, recounted how churches were occupied by the militia, priests were arrested or killed at their altars, nuns were taken away during the night in police lorries to be imprisoned and mistreated. Hundreds of priests and bishops were held in monasteries awaiting deportation. And he continued, and yet we have to admit, however painful, that we did not hear even one Orthodox bishop bear witness publicly of his abomination of these acts of violence.
A Tatălui și a Fiului și a Sfântului Spirit, acum și pururea și în vecii vecilor.
Socotesc că a fost o greșeală.
I believe that this was an error committed by the church to which I belong,
O greșeală a Bisericii Ortodoxe,
an error of the Orthodox Church,
care au profitat
an error that was taken advantage of by the communist leadership of the time,
greșeală care provenea
an error that was the consequence of the cordial relations that had always existed between the Orthodox Church and the state.
hotărât ca tot ceea ce a aparținut
The decision was taken that everything that had belonged to the Greek Catholic Church would now become the property of the Orthodox Church.
a fost o greșeală pe care noi ortodoxi am
I repeat, we Orthodox committed an error by accepting that decree at the time.
care însă
Though with the communist regime in control, it would have been difficult to refuse.
era atotstăpânitoare, era greu să-l respingi, era greu să-l refuzi.
As a consequence of the persecution of the Greek Catholic Church, 12 arrested bishops spent many years in prison. Of the 12, 7 were to die in captivity.
Nici unul dintre episcopi
None of our priests or bishops were ever sentenced, and to be honest, they were never tried.
de fapt niciodată. În 1950,
The first bishop to die in 1950 was the Honourable Vasile Aftenie.
sigur, a fost bătut, terorizat.
He was, of course, beaten, terrorized, starved, left out in the cold without clothing, in water and in the dark.
Întuneric,
They pulled out his beard.
pe viu, aflăm că
We know that on leaving his cell, he embraced the remaining bishops and declared that he would never betray the faith.
și a spus că el nu-și va trăda niciodată credința. În 1952,
The Honourable Valerio Frenzio, well advanced in age, all of 77 years, also dies from malnutrition and the cold in 1952.
mâncării insuficiente, a frigului. În 1953,
The youngest bishop, Ioan Suciu, dies in 1953.
cel mai tânăr dintre episcopi, moare pentru că
He
avea
dies because of a stomach ulcer,
cancer,
never having received medical care, in fact the opposite, having been served dishes that had been contraindicated for such an illness.
exact contraindicate pentru boala sa. Urmează în 1955
The Honourable Tit Liviu Chinezu also expires as a result of illness suffered during his prison stay, malnutrition, beating, isolation and the cold.
suficient de bătaie, de izolare, de frig. În 1959, din cauza
After an arduous prison life, illness and of course age, the Honourable Balan, Bishop of Lugoj, dies in 1959 at the age of 79.
moare preasfințitul Balan, episcopul Lugojului. Preasfințitul Rusu,
Whilst the near total lack of any medical care leads to the passing in 1963 of the Honourable Alexandru Rusu, Bishop of Maramureș.
la stingerea din viață.
Nici unul din aceștia n-a defecționat cu nimic,
None of them disowned their faith,
oamenilor,
in spite of the persecution,
ci și-au
but they ended their
sfârșit
earthly
viața
existence praising God.
aducând laudă și mulțumită lui Dumnezeu.
The last of the 7 bishops died after 22 years in captivity. He was Bishop Iuliu Hosu, the first cardinal of Romania's Greek Catholic Church, who in 1918, as a young and very highly respected bishop, read out Transylvania's and Romania's Act of Union.
Le cardinal Hosu était justement allé à Bucarest pour porter un rapport.
Cardinal Hosu was on his way to Bucharest to submit a report. He stopped at his brother's place on the way. Not unlike everybody, he went to bed. Loud door knocking woke them during the night. They immediately entered his room, which wasn't normal in the case of a bishop, and they said, "Quickly, you're coming with us." "Who are you? What do you want?"
Qui êtes-vous? Qu'est-ce que vous voulez? Il dit non, c'est police, il faut obéir.
"We're from the police, and you're to obey us. You have 5 minutes. Get dressed, you're coming with us." He was immediately taken to the Internal Affairs Ministry. They put him in a cellar, said nothing during the whole day, and took all his belongings. He was under arrest from that moment on.
Bishop Iuliu Hosu was detained at the Orthodox monastery at Calderușani to the end of his life. He could not see his congregation. All sorts of methods were tried to persuade him to renounce his allegiance to Rome. Orthodox Patriarch Justinian Martin offered him the leadership of the Metropolitan Archbishopric of Moldavia, which, taking into account the succession rights in the Orthodox Church, was tantamount to assuming the future function of the Patriarch of the Romanian Orthodox Church. Bishop Hosu refused.
În 1968,
His Eminence Giovanni Celli, the Holy See's envoy, comes to Romania in 1968 and meets Bishop Iuliu Hosu at the monastery in Calderușani.
Cardinalul Iuliu Hosu la mănăstirea Căldărușani. Dar în această
During their
discuție,
one-to-one
doar
discussion,
între cei
His
doi,
Eminence Celli
la mănăstire,
asks the bishop,
când
"If the Holy Father ordained you a cardinal, Father, what would you do? Would you accept?"
Sfântul Părinte v-ar numi
The bishop is said to have answered,
ce ați face?
"What would that
Ați accepta?"
entail?
Episcopul
Would I have to go to Rome?
ar fi răspuns, ce
Possibly
ar
yes.
însemna aceasta, să plec la Roma? Da, eventual.
After a moment's reflection, a moment's hesitation, the bishop answered,
Meditat un pic.
"I thank the Holy Father, but I cannot accept. I cannot leave country, nation, and my congregation. My place is here, amongst my flock.
Poporul credincioșii. Locul meu este aici, în mijlocul turmei mele. Sfântul Părinte,
The Holy Father, Paul VI, did not listen and appointed him to the College of Cardinals in 1970, but in pectore.
dar in pectore.
Cardinal Hossu dies the same year, aged 85, with 3 words on his lips: "Everything yours, Lord," describing the 22 years of captivity as a road of blessings. A further 3 years had to pass before the appointment became public knowledge.
Am reușit ca împreună cu încă un fost coleg de teologie la Alba Iulia
We succeeded, together with a theology friend of mine from Alba Iulia, to get to the place, the cell, so-called home, where he was forcibly kept under house arrest.
deținut în domiciliu forțat obligatoriu.
He was greatly surprised by our coming. How did you get in?
Și le-am întreținut timp de 2
We talked for 2 hours. Cardinal Hossu couldn't talk very much, except to whisper. He was very weak.
decât în șoaptă. Era foarte slăbit. Avea o masă de scris.
He had a table made out of 2 unplaned planks, on which he would celebrate the Holy Mass every day.
Sfânta Liturghie de zi.
I was so happy for having been able to get to know him.
Deci l-am cunoscut și am fost
He was indeed holy
cunoscut.
in this life, here on earth.
Realmente un sfânt în viață pe pământ.
To maintain continuity of the hierarchy, the Apostolic Nuncio to Romania, Gerard Patrick O'Hara, before he was removed, ordains further bishops at the behest of the Pope, amongst others Iuliu Hirția, Ioan Dragomir, Ioan Ploscaru, and Alexandru Todia, who subsequently was to become a cardinal.
This is the second generation of bishops who, in a certain way, have been called upon to carry the estafette further on. I do not know to what degree they appreciated how hard it would be for them, but one can be sure that they accepted, in the knowledge that the task could be subject to persecution. Despite well versed in the task of hiding, the majority were arrested within a couple of years.
A lot of people were arrested. More than 1.5 million were in different communist prisons. My father was a teacher, and he formed with his pupils a group of anti-communist resistance. They were arrested in August 1948. His group of resistance was a Christian group. So they prayed together, and they have meditation together, and their conception of life was the Catholic one. After the trial, he was imprisoned in the prison of Pitești in South Romania, where was the most diabolic prison, the so-called brainwashing. They were tortured day and night. A big part of the prisoners were in a terrible situation, even from physical point of view and even from the point of view of their soul. In Pitești, there were 3 stages of this so-called re-education or the brainwashing. First of all, you were tortured to tell the things you didn't do before. The second one was to compromise yourself in front of the others and in your conscience. So you had to say ugly things about your faith, about your family, about your mother, about all of things. And many people, after they could not resist anymore to be beaten day and night, and they did that. And the third stage, you were tortured up to the point when you accepted to torture the others. So when you accepted to be a part of those who tortured their comrades, that meant that you were a re-educated person. There were satanistic masses where many Christians or even priests were obliged to do very horrible things, blasphematory things against our faith. The prisoners were obliged to say prayers in front of a recipient with excrement. So they have to consider this is the altar and this is the bread and the wine, and they have to have consecration with the excrement.
Les personnes qui n'avaient pas la foi en prison,
Those imprisoned and without faith fell into depression. That was what the prison aimed to achieve. Sometimes they would commit suicide. It was a real battle for life.
parce que c'était vraiment une bataille pour la vie.
Even if the bishops and many priests were in prison, simple believers, lay people, continued to maintain their Catholic faith in family, with prayers, with devotions like Rosary, like Via Crucis, by prayers in small groups. My great-grandmother went 12 kilometers every Sunday to participate to a Catholic Mass. Even she was a simple peasant, she wanted at any price, at any cost, to remain Catholic. The active resistance were the participation to clandestine masses. There were masses who took place in small flats, small groups of believers, maybe 5 persons, 10 persons, at low voice. In the first part of communism, such a clandestine mass, it was automatically a reason to be put in jail.
Ne găsim în capela părinților bazilieni din Cluj-Napoca.
We're in a Basilian chapel at Cluj-Napoca that survives from communist times. The first room was used as a cellar, a kind of food storage area.
Magazie pentru alimente.
There's only a single entrance in the other part. There was a wall here, and there was a wardrobe at door level through which one had to pass to reach the chapel.
Și în dreptul ușii era pus un dulap prin care se intra în capelă.
Ordinations to the priesthood also took place in this chapel, brothers taking the veil, temporary vows and final vows. We lacked the courage to wear the habit at the time because the risks were unacceptable. Each of us worked in a factory wherever we were able to find work. We were, so to speak, soul monks. When we celebrated Holy Mass, there would be no singing liturgy. We always covered up the windows, and there was an absolute silence, lest someone on the outside found out.
Cea mai mare tăcere, cea mai profundă tăcere, pentru ca să nu se știe în exterior.
Înțelepciune drept.
Veniți să ne închinăm și să cădem la Hristos. Mântuiește-ne pe noi, Fiul al lui Dumnezeu.
În felul acesta, fiind preot,
Being a priest, I had everything I needed to celebrate Holy Mass. At the same time, an investigation or spot check could take place at any moment, so one could not carry anything that would indicate who one was. Thus, the chalice was a stemmed glass that stood amongst other glasses in my room, and only I knew that it was a chalice used to celebrate Holy Mass. The patine was a glass front from a laboratory clock. I worked in a chemical laboratory at the time. They advised me to pour the wine into laboratory phials, so that when I celebrated Holy Mass, all I needed to do was to cut a phial, pour the wine into the chalice, and that way avoid leaving any evidence.
Se spunea că fac parte dintr-o sectă necunoscută încă.
There was talk that I belonged to a sect. The sect was the Greek Catholic Church. I managed to find work at a quarry as an unqualified labourer. I was there for 10 years, from 6 to 6, including Saturdays and Sundays. In the meantime, one night, in some dark cellar in the centre of Cluj, the Bishop Ioan Dragomir Maramureș ordained me a priest of the Greek Catholic Church, in secret.
M-a hirotonit preot pentru Biserica Greco-Catolică în clandestinitate.
Thereafter, my whole life had to be split between hard work and church matters. I celebrated holy masses and confessed hundreds of faithful during the night. The Securitate will call me up at least once a week, if not twice. I was and remain convinced that those days were the most beautiful days of my life. I only regretted and continue to regret in my soul that even my parents, father and mother, could not know, right up to their death, that I am a priest.
Tata și mama n-au putut să știe când au murit că eu sunt preot.
Hristos a înviat! Hristos a înviat! Hristos a înviat! Hristos a înviat din moarte, călcând în morminte, viață dăruindu-le, și nouă ne-a dăruit viață veșnică, ne închinăm, fiind învieruitule de a treia zi.
Some operated as underground priests and bishops for years, also after 1964, following Nicolae Ceausescu's takeover. Although Romania experienced a thaw of a kind, and political prisoners and clergymen were released, the Greek Catholic Church did not exist officially, so its priests had to continue working underground.
Aceștia au reluat încet activitatea lor pastorală.
Slowly but surely they took up their pastoral duties, trying to organize small parishes as best they could. Bishops began, so to speak, to count their flock, how many priests had remained faithful, how many were able to undertake various duties. Bishops were watched every step of the way, but they were nevertheless allowed to work.
Desfășoare activitatea.
We organized Holy Mass, meetings with young people as well as catechism classes. There was a Mass celebrated by the Very Reverend Bishop Todea. 80 people gathered in our house, 80. People continued to feel the fear, and they, the communists, wanted to maintain that fear, even if they were no longer willing to arrest anybody. On a certain occasion, a funny situation developed, when they began coming to us to ask us to draw the curtains, so that no one could see that we were celebrating Holy Mass.
Ich war ein Pfarrer in einem versteckten Dorf in den Bergen.
I was a priest of an out-of-the-way parish hidden in the mountains.
Das Ende des Kommunismus eingeläutet ist, dann waren wir sehr froh.
When we heard that the end of communism was ever nearer, we were not quite sure what that meant, but we felt that it was going to be something unique.
Wir waren überzeugt davon, dass das etwas Außerordentliches ist. Ganz am Anfang waren unsere Kirchen
The churches began to fill. People who could not come before, like teachers and members of the party, who had never been convinced communists. Many discovered their allegiances soon after the collapse.
Lehrer und Lehrerinnen, dann verschiedene Parteileuten, die nicht überzeugte Kommunisten waren. Und sie waren sofort nach der Wende.
For us, Latin Catholics, it wasn't as great an experience as it was for the Greek Catholics.
Für uns, für die Lateiner, war das vielleicht nicht so groß.
We weren't disestablished. We were somewhat oppressed.
Wir waren nicht
For the Greek Catholics, the joy was all the greater, because they finally regained their freedom.
Eine noch größere Freude. Sie haben endlich ihre Freiheit zurückbekommen.
The wave of freedom that rolled through Central and Eastern Europe also reached Romania. The communist regime fell towards the end of December 1989. In contrast to other Eastern Bloc countries, Romania's bloody revolution cost over 1,000 lives. Nicolae Ceausescu, the country's leader, and his wife were also shot dead before the eyes of the whole world. One of the first changes was Act 126. Passed in 1990, it re-established the Greek Catholic Church.
Deschideți voi, boieri, porțile și vă ridicați porți veșnice și va intra împăratul măririi. Hristos a înviat.
Adevărat a înviat.
A fost condamnat la moarte, Hristos.
Christ was sentenced to death, crucified, was buried, and then rose from the dead. Exactly the same happened to Romania's Greek Catholic Church. That church was crucified and then resurrected.
Acum suntem foarte fericiți că avem
We are very happy that we have freedom, religious freedom. We can pray when we want. There are plenty of services. We have not lost our faith. And the proof is what you can see. The church is full and will be even fuller. Those that were forced to change their faith are also returning, so the church is full.
In the 1990s, there was a tremendous enthusiasm, especially amongst Greek Catholics. That enthusiasm took on a very heroic form in that Sunday Mass was celebrated in the town square. During the summer, that was pleasant, but in winter, with the temperatures of minus 20 degrees centigrade, the priest who had to stand for an hour and a half, those were really exceptionally difficult moments for him and the faithful who stood by the altar.
Realmente a fost o mare explozie de bucurie și
It was indeed an explosion of real joy and thanksgiving to God for what had happened. The faithful arrived from the whole country, consecrated, monks, nuns, priests, but now not in secret, but openly, free. That's how we felt. However, what we believed in, and the hopes we then had, have not been wholly realized.
Ceea ce credeam și speram noi atunci nu prea s-a înfăptuit.
The enthusiasm fueled by freedom slowly had to give way to the difficult realities facing the country in the 1990s. Not all those Greek Catholics who were forced to become Orthodox returned to their former church, burdened with enormous material problems. To date, of the 2,200 churches taken over by the Orthodox Church, Greek Catholics have managed to regain just 160. In some places, services continue to be held in rented school premises, cinemas, or under open skies. In addition, monasteries, schools and hospitals seized by the communists have also been returned to Greek Catholic hands.
Government officials are often tendentious. It is, for example, impossible to find a bailiff who would enforce the return of the church. Local authorities often support one side, even if the court ruling is against them. And that side is always Orthodox.
Part of the Orthodox hierarchy, which continues to believe the Greek Catholics to be a sect and celebrates the anniversary of the liquidation of the Greek Catholic Church in Alba Iulia, fear the loss of a congregation, and so they prefer to destroy a church and build a new one in its place, rather than to hand it back to the Greek Catholics.
Moreover, we are not as a result disappointed that the faithful do not come, because it is very difficult to pull a congregation out of a church and tell them, "Come with us to a temporary home."
A way out of the deadlock in this dispute over churches is often the building of a new place of worship. This solution is, however, a burden that the Greek Catholic Church cannot carry without the help of Western Catholics. Priests and seminarians themselves also continue to need material backing. The cost of living in a country that joined the European Union in 2007 is comparable to that found in the rest of Europe, whilst wages, at least for the moment, continue to lag far behind.
Priests have no parish centres. Their pay is very low, as are their parish's revenues. The state payout is in certain instances based on the number of faithful listed in the 2002 register. Priests, on average, receive €100 per month. The register lists 200,000 faithful, whereas according to the annual pontifical statistics, we have about 700,000 faithful. In the years 1991-92, the seminaries were overflowing. Please just imagine for a moment that in 1991, 60 people sat the entrance exam. Now we don't even have 60 seminarists in all 6 years. There are 56. That was a great boom. The numbers began to fall slowly, and in addition we had to refuse people for financial reasons and for lack of space. Even today, the main problem, a very pressing one, is financial. Every year we receive a substantial amount of aid from Aid to the Church in Need. It is like air that enables us to secure an education for our young people.
In 1999, the initiator of World Youth Days visited Romania. Pope John Paul II's visit, although preceded by many and difficult negotiations, was an historic one to a predominantly Orthodox country, where the Orthodox community constitutes 85% of the population. Towards the end of the Holy Mass celebrated in Izvor Park, a cry went up, raised by both Catholics and Orthodox believers. Unitate, unity! The Holy Father charged the young with the task of bringing this dream of unity about. In his farewell speech delivered at Bucharest airport, he said, "During recent days, the Spirit entrusted you, young people, with God's dream, that all people should be part of his family, that all Christians be as one. Enter the new millennium with that dream. You, who have been liberated from the nightmare of a communist dictatorship, do not be deceived by false and dangerous dreams of consumerism. They also destroy the future. Jesus bids you to dream about a new Romania, a land where East and West can meet in brotherhood. That Romania lies in your hands." Six years later, John Paul II's successor, Benedict XVI, raised the Romanian Greek Catholic Church to the dignity of a great archbishopric. The solemn reading of the papal edict took place in the Archbishop's Cathedral in Blaș.
Lo spirito del risorto ha sostenuto la Chiesa greco-cattolica romena.
The spirit of the resurrected one has strengthened Romania's Greek Catholic Church in its suffering, and the cross led it to the resurrection and now accompanies it on its way. As confirmation of his goodness, the Lord has endowed this church with the gift of full maturity by lifting it to the dignity of a great archbishopric. Cleansed by Christ's blood, it paid the high price of unity with the blood of its martyrs.
As it goes forward, the Greek Catholic Church endeavours not to forget the past that the state continues not to want to confront, as well as to remember its martyrs. The beatification process of the 7 bishops who died in captivity continues.
Why has a judgment not been passed? Perhaps because Christ's bride, the Church, accepts this way of the cross with which it is to be entrusted and to which it submits. Communism, not unlike fascism or any other ideology, can become an instrument of the Church's sanctification. What we believe in cannot be bought, and even death cannot be the argument that would stop us or determine that we should abandon this choice. The figure, for example, of Iuliu Hosu, of the cardinal who was in prison for 22 years, and who on his deathbed, after so many years of imprisonment, spoke the words, "Everything yours, Lord," and who called that period a road of blessings. Therein lies a unique source of strength for a church so often struggling with the everyday, but once returning to those witnesses in order to once again find exactly that strength, that spiritual strength, which is a kind of almighty testimonial